Welcome everybody, our first online webinar of Sailon, El Sailon. So welcome, which is a format I've developed in person through AI salons in Santa Fe. And welcome to our first one called AI in Film. And the questions we're going to tackle are, is AI a creative collaborator or a job killer? Who are the emerging auteurs in this new machine age? Will the world embrace the first fully AI generated film or reject it? Can hybrid workflows preserve the soul of cinema? And how do we navigate this growing minefield of ethics, authorship, and ownership? We're going to get into all of that, and we're here to discuss and answer some of those questions with, I think, some heavy hitters. All of these gentlemen have been on my podcast and definitely have a point of view. First up is Peter Csathy. He's a business development executive, business advisor, deal maker, and I think I can mention you're an entertainment lawyer. And then there's Mark Turner, a creator, technologist, and entrepreneur, former Microsoft guy. Scott Ross, video effects legend, co-founder of Digital Domain and now author. And Andy Beach. He's an advisor, author, media technology know-it-all, also formerly of Microsoft. And then there's me. I'm a brander, marketer, podcast host, and much more. But right now I'm going to share my screen and we'll get into it. And okay, that's our beautiful title slide. Okay, let's go on. I want to thank our sponsors, City of Santa Fe Economic Development Department. They've been a terrific supporter over this past year, and Hutton Broadcasting. So we thank their sponsorship and support. But let's do the AI roundup. So this is a thing I do in my live salons, and people like it. First up is copyright, guardrails and fair use, an explosive topic with news every day. Going back a little time, we're not going to be able to count on our government to regulate AI, as our illustrious president sacked the U.S. copyright chief after they wrote a report. But there is hope, because if the government's not going to help us, maybe the Pope can, because he's calling for an ethical framework and a message to tech executives that just happened this week. So that's interesting. And then very recently, Anthropic won a key U.S. ruling on AI training in the author's copyright lawsuit, which is favorable towards AI, which is different than a lot of the other findings. But I'm sure Peter has a few points of view on that.
Just a few.
Yeah, but let's go on. So Hollywood thaws. There is a rise of AI studios and ethical platforms now that we're 2.5 years into this effort. And so some of the headlines, is the industry turning towards AI? Clean AI companies are popping up. Asteria and Flawless are two of these companies that see the ethical way forward. And then there's this whole new breed of AI studios. And there's 65 around the world that have launched. And Fremantle just launched Imagine Studios to create content using AI tools. So you see this thaw. You see real filmmakers, real studios starting to develop relationships with AI. Ironically, at the same time, some of them are suing Midjourney and other platforms, but certainly interesting to watch. And then Madison Avenue. So AI in film, part of that subset is AI in video. And I think that advertising has already embraced AI much faster than Hollywood because of the short form nature of the content and less guilds and unions to kind of strike and raise up issues. So the question is, Madison Avenue is changing a lot with holding companies kind of spinning off these agencies. Mark Zuckerberg announcing that, the agency is dead because all you have to do is give hardly a brief to Facebook next year, and then they're just going to take care of your whole campaign, bypassing creative, bypassing agencies, all that, and media planners. So that's revolutionary. And then just recently, with VO3, there was an AI campaign in the NBA Finals. So it made a big splash, and that company got about 400 job applications the day after that aired. Not that there's necessarily a lot of jobs at that place, but it's interesting in terms of uptake. So let's just go around the horn, because that kind of sets the table of what we're going to talk about. And the conversation may vary and weave, and that's okay. But Andy, why don't you tell us what's going on, what your point of view is?
Yeah, I feel like anytime AI comes up, I sometimes get labeled an AI optimist. I believe Peter called me an AI optimist at some point. I think I'm more AI progressive. I want there to be a positive future for it, but I know we have to be part of the way that we solve that. So we have to actively work with it. There are sort of two philosophies that tend to get bandied about. There's technical determinism. Technology gives us the culture we we want. And there's cultural determinism. Culture and we create the technology that we want. I fall more into that second camp of how do we take the technology that we're shown and then how do we continually reinforce and reshape it. So 100% know that there are flaws with the system we have. I think we're doing a better job of exposing and identifying those. And I think the more we can be transparent about the ways that we're fixing it and the ways that we're beginning to deploy it, we'll end up with the tools that will actually be valuable in what this is, regardless of the industry.
Okay, cool. Great. And, I'm an AI optimist myself, so thanks for sharing some of that optimism. Let's go to Peter. Peter Csathy. You have a strong point of view, so please share with us.
Well, my perspectives are I'm an optimist in general as an individual, I think. And so, Andy, don't take that as to be an AI optimist, not at all. I would say though that when it comes to this topic, I'm an AI stoic, meaning it is what it is. And so the question is not, I've run tech forward media companies, so I embrace new technology. My main, I guess, meta point is that, but technology has to be implemented in the what I would say right way. And the right way has a lot of different aspects to it. Certainly, there are the business and legal issues that we're going to get into, so I won't touch upon them here. But there's a lot of copyright issues that matter, both from a infringement standpoint, but also as a filmmaker, you have to understand that at least as of now, the Copyright Office does not grant copyrights to something that is purely AI generated. And it's a very vague line of how much human interactivity is necessary for there to be a something to be able to be copyrighted. So we'll dig into that a little more. But as a filmmaker, you need to know that because obviously, if something is not owned by you from a copyright standpoint, then others can use what you've created, and that may not be what you want. When it comes to AI in general, and this gets to being stoic about it, that they're just like most things in life. There are very positive uses to AI when it comes to filmmaking. So I'll give you an example that I thought was very cool. And Kurt, you already mentioned the AI film studio Asteria. And I know Paul Trillo and the gang over there, and they're a group of filmmakers, and they're a team of filmmakers. And they're not, and Paul just recently had a conversation where he said he's not a flag holder for AI, just like, AI as a panacea for filmmaking. Rather, he's just finds it as a tool, like a new palette for his artistry. And so it's a new medium on which to paint, essentially. Think of it that way. And he gave an example and showed an example. He and his team created this animated film called Cuco, Cuco, which is a really cool film. And what Cuco is that it's a work of art that never otherwise would have been able to have been completed unless AI, generative AI, was available to them. Because Cuco was based on art, painted art by an artist, I forgot his name, but it's really vivid, vibrant art with extensive detail and all that. So to create an animated film without generative AI, it would have been virtually impossible just from a funding standpoint and all that. So this artist's vision would never have seen the light of day. But with generative AI, and the artist created something like 60 to 100 different paintings or images, he was able to train the generative AI on just his images, and then they were able to create an animated film with all the tremendous, immense detail in it. And it's a really beautiful film. And so it's very authentic to the artist's art. And then it's using a clean system of generative AI only utilizing licensed works or owned works from the artist themselves. So I don't want to get into any more now, but that's kind of the high level where I think it's really cool, where I think that we are going to have a really interesting discussion about it is just, will AI then flood the zone with a lot of crappy video and crappy film, which may not allow the positive to rise from the bottom? And I think that the great works will continue to rise from the bottom, but there will be a lot more noise out there. So there's a lot, there's I think a conversation to be had about just AI in everything, whether it's in education, whether it's used for creative arts or anything, of whether generative AI becomes a crutch that then essentially dumbs down artistry and such. And that's the artistic element of it. So I'll stop with that, but just as
Okay.
a couple different.
A lot of good points. A lot of good points. So let's go to Mark Turner. Mark, what are your thoughts?
All right. I'm short-term optimistic on Gen AI. I'm long-term, worry about this entire society. But short-term, generally good for content creators. And I agree, Peter, good for people who have a story to tell that will be able to do it at a fraction of the cost that you previously could, which is great for getting out stories. It will mean smaller teams. It will mean more content faster. TV shows may not take 40 weeks to create. You may be able to knock them out in 20 weeks. I've seen some animation demos of people knocking out, good quality animation in a weekend from a script and not much more. There will be a flood of absolute dearth, let's face it, because you've just lowered the barrier so far that someone can sit there and sort of prompt a bunch of things just by randomly typing in stuff and then post it on YouTube and the other social platforms, which are already a massive complete dearth anyway. There's a fraction of percent that actually is successful. And you've got to imagine that cream will still rise to the top. There is a big question as to whether the big studios will be able to embrace that technology. Because the bit that people don't talk about, and the bit that I'm actually feeling slightly more positive about in the last 4 months, and you mentioned some of those companies that are doing decent tools now, is this idea that a professional content creator is going to sit in front of a text prompter and type in what they want as a movie and prompt that way is just never going to happen. It will be for the dearth. I can type in some shit and make a movie, but I'm not a film director. A film director is visual. They work on storyboards. They create art. They will direct with their hands. They will direct with emotion. The idea of saying, now put all that down into a text prompt was never really going to happen for the high-end content creation. But now we're seeing some really compelling tools from filmmakers using AI models, using 10, 15, 20 different AI models that will allow filmmakers to use Gen AI to expand a scene, to make a scene longer, to add a character to a scene, to add a CG character to a scene in the way that they're used to, by drawing on screen and pointing and saying, I want it over here. And I don't want to blow up the entire image. I just want to change the background. And so 3 years ago, when everybody got excited about AI, none of this stuff was happening. Now you can actually see tools coming together, individual tools. By the end of this year, the next bit we need is a workflow. And that's still the bit that people are struggling with, right? If you are a content creator, an ad agency, or a small independent production company, frankly, anyone bigger than a YouTuber who's got 2 people has a workflow, right? There is creation, there is review, there is approval, there are notes, there is go back and do it again, change this, change that. You need a workflow to make professional media. And these AI tools so far have not been able to plug into an existing workflow. That's changing a little bit. I'm beginning to see that. That's when the floodgates really open, right? At the point that you've got AI native tooling and you've got a workflow that understands all that stuff and allows the humans to get involved and do human approvals as they go and tweak things, then you unleash, some professional media creation that is going to be really great, that hasn't been capable of been doing before and will be done on a fraction of the budget. But I don't subscribe to this idea that it's just going to be a film director just doing it on his own or her own. I still think you need departments You need someone who's in charge of sound. You need someone who's in charge of visual effects and someone who's in charge of color. They may not have 50 people in their teams behind them in the future. They may only have one person and an AI, but they are still responsible for that part of bringing it together. And that creative team is where half the magic really happens. Like you want that level of human creativity and some AI thrown in there to bounce ideas off of, but that's where the magic actually occurs, is when you put creative people together in a room and make them do stuff. So I'm high on the opportunity. I haven't yet seen it, but it's coming. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. So integration and aggregation, I think, are the keys that you're talking about, because that hasn't completely happened yet. That would allow that workflow. But let's hear from Scott Ross, who knows about a thing or two about visual effects. So what's your point of view?
I think I have to start off with the great Saturday Night Live line, which is "Jane, you ignorant slut." So I look at AI as a paradox. There's wonderful things that one can say about it, not only in film but in all other fields and whatnot. I'm thinking it will save people's lives, and there are things that are just extraordinary. The other word that I use about AI is "not yet." So it is the fastest learning technology that has ever been sort of deployed. It is what we saw 6 months ago is amazing. What we see now and what we'll see in 6 months from now will be even more amazing. And so, the cat's out of the bag, and it's running real fast. There are several things that are positive about it, and that's the democratization of creativity. And so up until this point, there have been gatekeepers, and to be able to break on through from those gatekeepers, oftentimes it was you were Barbara Streisand's hairdresser. It wasn't necessarily sort of based on capabilities necessarily, though we have seen a bunch of great filmmakers, my ex-partner being one of them, rise to the top, my ex-boss being another one. So there will be an opportunity for creative democratization and the removal of the already existing sort of infrastructure that stops one from making great content or getting their content out. I look at it also from a business perspective. And the business perspective to me is very, very frightening, at least from where I sit or where I used to sit. So earlier on, we had this conversation. When I first started in the industry, when I was running Industrial Light and Magic in the 1980s, we had about 100 people there. And today, there are 100,000 people working in the visual effects industry. And so back in the day, there were 3 or 4 major players, and now there are thousands upon thousands of visual effects companies, and they're scattered all over the world. And my fear is that to make things less expensive, Jim Cameron came out, my ex-partner Jim Cameron came out and made a statement that he joined the board of a AI company to understand how AI was going to work, and that his hope was that it was going to lower the budgets of his films by 50%. And the only way it's going to lower the budget of his films by 50% is by, he's not going to take a cut in pay. He's not going to take a cut in his back end. The studios are not going to take less money. The costs are visual effects and animation. And so what's going to happen is there are going to be a whole lot of people out of work. And so to my social democratic sensibilities come out, and I say, well, what about the worker? What about all these men and women that have done all of this work over the years, by the way, have been poorly compensated and hardly recognized? They get rushed off the stage, even at the Academy Awards. And so what happens to these folks? Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? So there's been a big promise. And the big promise is that these folks are actually really creative people. And now they'll have the opportunity to finally realize their dreams, and they'll become the new John Lasseters or the new James Camerons or the new George Lucas. And I say BS because I've worked with thousands upon thousands of these people over the last 40 years, and only a handful of them have risen to become world-class storytellers and creatives. Most of them are what I'll call tertiary creatives. They might be able to put the arms on the Venus de Milo, but they can't go to the quarry, cut out a piece of marble, and actually make it into something. I also, and you've heard me talk about this before, we look at history and we look at the similar kinds of things. While I think AI is fundamentally different than every other technology tool ever made, I think AI is an agent and will become an agent, and therefore is by its very nature and essence different than every tool that's ever been developed. But if we go back to PostScript in the 1980s, when John Warnock and Adobe develops PostScript, we had thousands upon thousands of periodicals, and all of them were just garbage. Maybe 5 of them rose to the top. And so if I was to look at the crystal ball, and oftentimes my crystal ball is very cloudy, but if I was to look at the crystal ball, I would say, yes, there will be breakthrough efforts by creative filmmakers that might not have had the chance to be able to get through the gatekeepers, now can get through the gatekeepers and can create great works of art and emotion and movement, etc. But what about all of those other people who think that because now they have the tools, they too are going to become John Lasseter or Pete Docter? And they're just not. We've seen it time and time and time again. So on one hand, I'm excited about what one can do in terms of production value, but I'm sort of depressed by and don't really see or embrace the fact that these visual effects people think that they're first-class creative folks, because most of the stuff that I've seen in AI is absolutely atrocious. Great production value, beautiful camera movement, great production design, and it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. There's no emotion, there's no creativity to it. It's not moving me. Now we could say, well, does Michael Bay really move you? And the answer is no. But what he does have is distribution capabilities that allows his films to be seen all over the world. So somebody mentioned Kuko. I think it was you, Pete, right? Was that?
Yeah.
So how long a film is it?
No, it's a short film. It's like 5 minutes long.
Right. So we're seeing very short films. We've not really yet seen a narrative film. I've seen a few documentaries, Jailbird, which I thought was really cool, but I've not seen a long form. And then I've not seen distribution or marketing or all of the things that it takes to make a business. Now, yes, we're in the initial phases of it all. And as I said earlier, it's growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm interested to see where it goes. On the other hand, I'm really glad I'm 74.
And we're glad you're around.
Can I pick up on something there, Kurt?
Yeah,
I think there's an
You've
important
done the
point about
round table,
distribution.
so please.
Yeah. So you picked up on a really good point, right? So there's been 2 waves of economic crisis, right? And what happened during the pandemic, which actually caused a lot of the strikes and a lot of the Hollywood downturn that's happening, has got nothing to do with AI at all. It was all to do with digital. Right, it was about streaming. It was about the just fundamental cut, pay TV collapsing and everybody switching to streaming. That started years before that, I would argue, when YouTube came out, because what used to be one of the big gatekeepers was the cost of distribution. Right, if you wanted to get a TV show running, you needed to be on a cable network, and getting on a cable network was finite, and there may have been 300 channels, but still getting a show on there was really hard and really expensive. And that disappeared. There is now, if you're good and creative and you can make content and put it out at a reasonable fee, you will find an audience eventually. You may need to throw some money into a marketing pool, but there is a way to get an audience now that is arguably bigger than all of the broadcast networks have used to have in this country. So the distribution barriers have gone. What Gen AI now is potentially doing is taking away the other big barrier, which was the cost of making content. Professional looking content was also massive. And that potentially is just falling away, or it's at least going to drop in the orders of magnitude how much it would cost. But to your point, I'll state it another way. I've been trying to find an equivalent, and there is no real equivalent because we've had Gen AI before. But I think the closest thing from a tools point of view that I can think of is GarageBand and the music industry, right? Arguably with GarageBand, I can sit here and I can create horns and pianos and guitars, and I can build it all. I can create a whole freaking symphony if I wanted, but I can't because I'm not very good at music. I don't know how to make music. I know I can appreciate it, but I don't know how you create a great melody, right? the tool is there, but that does not make me a musician. And the tools in Gen AI, which is what you're struggling with, Scott, is the tools are now arguably there to make short films and sort of prompt the whole thing together. But unless you have a filmmaker's heart and brain and training, you're probably still going to come up with a bunch of crap. You'll be able to do it cheap and quick, and that's why I worry there'll be also all load of crap out there. So we haven't yet seen that killer combination of a really good filmmaker with a really good tool creating some really compelling content. But you can just draw a line as to when that's going to happen, and then everything's going to start.
That'll be a milestone. And I will say that with all these AI studios popping up, they're all going to work on, a long format film. And when whoever comes out with that first one, it will be judged as a film, not an AI film. And there's a lot of scrutiny on every film, right? Like there's a lot of bad films out in the market. There always have been, and very few hits. So
that's the other thing we should probably deal with. This idea that there'll be an AI film and a not AI film is probably wrong as well, right? So
just film.
There's not a visual effects film, right? There is a film with a bunch of visual effects in it that helped it get made and put the magic in there, but that's a film. So there will be films. There probably is this year going to be a film at the Oscars which had AI in it somewhere. They may not tell you, but there probably is.
Yeah.
But you will
there already was
film.
Yeah, there already was last year.
Brutalist. Like the Brutalist. I'm Hungarian, and so it was fascinating for me to see a film where Hungarian was actually spoken, and The Brutalist is a great film. And Adrian Brody was magically speaking Hungarian. And I could tell, because my ear is sensitive enough, I could tell when he was actually speaking Hungarian and when it was AI generated, Adrian Brody speaking Hungarian.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so that caused a brouhaha of sorts in Hollywood about, where does it begin? Where does it end? They're interesting questions. Look, I think that there's some really interesting part that Flawless is involved in this, where you're a producer of a film. Let's say I'm a Hungarian filmmaker and I create a great film, but I have a limited marketplace because very few people around the world speak that way. And so you can read your subtitles, and I'm a big advocate for reading the subtitles and listening to the actual voices. But for a producer of that film, a great film, it will be exposed to more audiences out there if you're able to do the flawless kind of dubbing with the mouth moving in sync, and it's still the actor's voice, but it's been converted into a different language. I think that's a really interesting idea. Now, on the flip side, of course, that takes away from voiceover actors around the world. So there is this sort of thing. And I guess one thing I would just say to all filmmakers who are listening to this, and I tell this to my son, who's in the audience out there too, and he's a bright guy, so I don't even need to tell it to him, which is, no matter how you feel about this stuff, this gets back to being stoic about what it is. You can't control what the environment is like out there. You can only control how you react to it. And my big piece of advice is that just understand all the tools, become proficient in the tools, be able to speak the language of these tools. It doesn't mean that you have to use it in your filmmaking or your creation of video, but it's important to understand them so that you may be able to bring them in. From a purely practical standpoint, there will be significant job losses in Hollywood in terms of traditional roles in filmmaking. There will be new jobs that open up, but nonetheless, just practically speaking, it will do you well and serve you well to be proficient in these tools, because you will be ahead of the curve and more likely to be seen as somebody who contribute value in a variety of potential jobs too.
Yeah, I want to add, because I just found a quote from Donna Langley, who's the chair at NBC Universal. She said the prevailing response to it was, for years, was a panic, and it was a bit overdone. But the industry has a choice. She said we could really be scared of it and run for the hills, or we could embrace it as a technology, and it could actually enable efficiency, which the studios care about, or just a better set of processes. She also added, however, as long as we think about the ethics of it, you need to keep it human-centric and ensure the technology is powered by humans. This is coming from a studio head, so I think this is all good. And
And
so
it's very delicately worded with a
it
lot of
was
PR and
delicately
lawyers.
worded.
It
I think
is.
is what
It
that
There's
is.
was.
also some
Probably
serious,
ran through
They're making
GPT.
statements finally. They
there's
didn't make
some
any
serious
statements for 2
self-interest
years.
there.
Their biggest statement is that they entered the litigation fray. They finally, Hollywood, there was
Sued
a reason.
Mid-Journey.
Yeah,
Mm.
there was
At
a
the
reason
same
why.
time, right? They're saying we should embrace it, but we're going to sue Mid-Journey. It's like
Yeah.
there's the dichotomy right there.
Yeah, they want to. Let's face it, the Hollywood studios want to, and it took this long for Disney and NBCU to be the first ones to actually go after one of the AI companies. Because of that reason, they are conflicted about it all.
Yeah. But it's also, look, they don't, I don't see how Midjourney is going to defend this one. If I can type into a tool, Stormtrooper attacking Incredible Hulk, with a lightsaber, well, you just trained on someone's IP. I mean, you shouldn't understand those things unless you're training off of someone's IP, right? And it's very easy to be all the democratization and everyone is. I want to make a movie and have a stormtrooper walk through. So I'm going to just prompt in stormtrooper walks through and smash his character on the head. Okay, great. So I think that's cool until, as you said, Peter, until it's my IP.
Yeah.
Now I've put it out there, and one of my characters gets ripped off and it's in someone else's movie. Now, oh, wait a minute. Now I care about copyright. Where's my protection in that? So this is, the studios are at the cutting edge of this. They've got 100 years worth of IP to defend, and arguably most of the value of the company is tied up in that library and the IP. So I'm surprised it's taken this long before they go defend that. But they need the tools to unlock that value.
They're seriously conflicted because on one hand, they want to protect their IP. And obviously, the reason they want to protect their IP is for revenue. They want to make sure that they get a piece of the pie because they created or somebody created it for them and they paid that person. On the other hand, they don't want $200 million movies. They want to lower the price of production. Right. So they're like, she's my mother, she's my sister, she's my mother. They want both. And therein lies the rub.
Right.
No question about it.
And then meanwhile, the other part of that statement, the last part of that was about keeping filmmakers on board, right? Because this is going to be a 5 to 10 year transition. And meanwhile, they need all those big filmmakers to keep coming to them. So, these big studios need to be filmmaker friendly, and they need to say, we're going to give you these tools and we're going to help you make more magic. But at the same time, as you said, we're going to defend our legacy business here.
But in the long run, don't you think it's that legacy business that's more threatened by the AI? If you have a studio system where AI now exists and anybody can use the tech, what am I using the studio for if I'm an artist and I want to go create something? What are they bringing me? Is it audience? Is it additional resource that I don't have? What are they bringing me?
So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what studios really do. I'm glad you mentioned that, Andy, because I'm going to put it to rest. It's the same with game publishers and it's the same with record labels. Studios do not make content. Studios fund content and they market content, and they pay production companies to go make content. So what they bring to an AI filmmaker is the same as they brought to a legacy filmmaker, right? We have budgets for funding it. We're a bank and we're a marketing company, and we'll help you find an audience, whether that's in the theaters or a streaming service or whatever. Now, you could argue that YouTube could do the same thing, different audience, but there's still an intermediary in there that sort of owns that aggregate audience that will try and bring it to you. I find it interesting that, the YouTubers, the creator economies, people call it, right? It's all about people sitting there with a webcam and making hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you look at a lot of those now, what they end up doing is recreating the studio system, right? They say, I'm going to help other people with how to do good content. I'm going to distribute it for them. I'm going to put them under my banner. And some of them now opened facilities in LA where they have sound stages and they rent the sound stages out to other YouTubers. And you go, well, wait a minute, there's nothing radical about that. The Warner Brothers did that 100 years ago. But it's kind of interesting how the cycle goes around. Just new tool. We're better at it than the last guy was, so we're going to be the new studio. But in essence, they're all doing the same thing. We're going to help you make content. We're going to fund that content, and we're going to help monetize it. We're going to take some money off the top, and you'll get some recognition.
Enough, point of order is that studios actually don't necessarily fund product. What studios do is go out and raise money from
Yeah,
other
in a
people
pool.
that they
Yeah,
can
yeah.
convince
Other
to
people's
give
money.
money to the studios so that the studios can act like they're funding the project. But it's
Yeah.
not really their money, oftentimes.
It's and that's
Yeah.
unless you're
Mark,
making Megalopolis, you wouldn't spend your own money on it either.
I don't know
It's a
if you
risky
heard, but
business.
Walmart is going to put creator studios in their stores now. I don't know if you heard
Of
that.
course they are.
It's like just like YouTube
Right.
studios, right? But they stopped that, and now Walmart's picking up that banner. So
And then you can pick up your
Okay.
36 paper towels at the same time while you're doing it.
that's
I mean,
right. Hey,
And
look,
come
sure.
in, record a podcast, and get some steaks and paper towels.
I
Right.
want to kind of step back for a second and raise a meta point about just creativity in general, where the faster things go, and it was interesting. I was listening to an Ezra Klein podcast from the New York Times, and I also read the book Rick Rubin and the art of, I forgot what it was called, but it's his most recent book, and they both talked about the same similar kinds of things. I'm afraid, and I'll describe it. I'm afraid of just the work itself, the micro decisions that go into the creation of any work of art, of any kind of form of creation. Just the plain hard work of it all, much of the time, and I believe this, can't prove it, the great work, it's those little micro decisions, the blood, sweat, and tears all along the way that made you be able to tap into something that's truly human and experiential that an increasingly automated process does not allow you to do. So again, it's not an indictment on AI in terms of creating a different palette of video or filmmaking. Not at all. But when we're talking about just the great works of art, do I believe it's impossible for AI being able to be utilized to generate some great work of art? I don't think it's impossible, but I do think that the natural inclination and the pressure to reduce resources is in conflict with the ability to take the time necessary to really create something entirely new. And that's something, again, that's what Ezra Klein was talking about. And if Rick Rubin, the great record producer, I think his book is worth reading because it also talks about the fact that, it's the little errors, the little mistakes that are made that make something truly human. So I think there is this kind of something that's novel is not the same thing as being purely original that really pushes art forward. And that's something that I struggle with apart from the business issues.
Well, we know we're in a derivative world. If it's training on everything that we know, and these hacks come in and just say, "Well, cool, looks good to me." They're not pushing the boundaries of creativity or the true technology or the true power of that technology that could be reached with a true creative. So, the creativity is eating itself right now and producing really nonplussed efforts that are boring and repetitive. And I think that,
And
but I
easily
think,
done, easily replicated by AI. But I would counter that there was a breakout hit last year on Netflix called Adolescence, the
yeah,
TV show, right? Have you all seen
yes,
that?
tracking
And
shot.
I would argue that no AI, if you just said make me a successful TV show, would be able to do that because it's 4 episodes for a start. The episodes are not linked really. They just jump from one to another. Each one is one scene in one camera movement, which is interesting from a visual effects point of view. But the narrative structure of it is just completely wrong, right? It just breaks all the rules. If you haven't watched it, the main character
Yeah,
does not
no.
win. There is not a classic arc here where they
Spoiler
have a
alert.
confrontation and then right, spoiler. You should go watch it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But even I'm impressed by the creative team that came up with that. And then I'm also impressed by the network executive who said, yeah, I'll make that.
Let's do
Like,
it.
that's a bold move right there. Because they're like, most people pitch it, same in startups. It's going to be like, pets.com and Uber, and we'll bring pet food to your door. Like, they always take a comparison to it's like this and that, and that's what I'm going to make. And that one was like, yeah, it's not like anything else you've seen before. Are you going to spend some money on it? And we're going to blow a whole bunch of visual effects on it too. So, I probably want 25 million for it for 4 episodes. And they went, yeah, sure. Let's do it. That sounds like fun. Like humans do that sort of crazy
Yes.
thing.
Thank you.
Rarely.
Rare,
I'd like to pose a
increasingly
question
less.
to everybody. So AI seems to be the ability to learn things at astronomical rates and levels. Possibly the people that AI that saw adolescence, that made adolescence, if it was, saw La Vie en Rose and said, tracking shots. That was very, very cool. So if you took two identical twins, same DNA, exactly the same DNA, and one was raised by a crack whore in a horrible neighborhood, it's in the, it was a terrible environment, and the other one raised in a loving environment where that twin got to experience all of the wonderful cultural things in the world. Would you say, and I'm not a Shockley fan at all, wouldn't you say nurture allowed this twin to be able to grow and be a more full person than the person who grew up, having in a terrible environment? So same DNA, same exact DNA.
Yeah, well, I think nurture plays a lot into
if we call nurture training in your scenario. By the way, I think I did all right in the crack house. My brother's much more successful than me. But I think I'm doing all right. Yeah. No, that's a good point about training, and that's actually another thing that people don't talk about enough, which I'm going to throw in here because we haven't mentioned it yet, is who's going to own these tools and essentially this core model, right? There is a finite number of companies in the world who can afford to train a core video model that you could type this stuff into, right? Google's spending billion. I mean, the amount that they've announced, the sort of top 5 tech companies have announced, is bigger than the moon budget, by 100x. Like, it's an insane. No one has ever invested this much technology from such a small number of companies in such a small amount of time. It's insane numbers. And therefore, you can kind of argue that there's not going to be room for someone to come up with a core video model unless you're ready to spend the billions now. Because you try coming in later, you're going to be coming out behind, right? The difference between VO2 and VO3 from Google was enormous, and that was just a few weeks or months in the gap. So there's this idea that, Hollywood, if you're going to call it that, the content creators are not going to own that model that generates the video.
Right.
Now, what can they control? What can they influence in that model? Like, I can try and tell it my IP, or I've got the tool on top, right? But there's this interesting new structure of ownership that people haven't really been talking about. Like, when you in the analog world, we'll call it that, there's a camera. You point the camera, you can go from Sony or Ari or Canon or whatever. You can point the camera in that direction and very much own the output from the camera, right? It's mine. I used the camera as a tool, it gave me an image, and I took the image and manipulated it. Well, in this case, there's no camera if you're literally prompting. So I'm using that model to give me an image. I don't actually know how it did that, which is kind of scary to begin with. And sometimes some of the owners don't know how it does that either. So there's kind of diffusion magic going on, but it's going to give me an image. Are they going to claim some ownership of that image at some point? And what happens when I want to manipulate the image? So I want to own some IP in this. I can build a LoRa that understands my IP, right? I'm going to build that on top of a core model. I'm not going to try and create an entire video model just to understand the Hunger Games. I mentioned that because there's a Lionsgate deal with an AI company. That was the bit they wanted out of it, right? You own the core model. I'm not even going to try and own it as a studio. I don't understand how to build it, but I do have my own IP, and I want to be able to wrap that around the core model and have it output, Katniss shooting a bow or SpongeBob kicking Patrick. That's my IP, and I got to wrap it around the outside of a core model. But that training only works for certain core models. So you can already start seeing we're in this whole new world where big tech has just inserted itself right at the core of content creation, where it's never been before.
Well, and it goes deeper than that too, as we mentioned at the very top of the hour when we started this, which is if something is AI generated, there's no bright line as to how much human interaction or engagement there needs to be for something to even be able to have the monopoly of copyright. And so you may create something. So when we're talking about ownership, this is something that is just a very practical question out there. that nobody knows what the answer is. And we have the Copyright Office that's trying to keep up with the law, as it always does, by the way. Whenever there's new technology, there's all these elusive copyright issues, and then they kind of make their way out of the courts, not necessarily in any kind of way that is entirely logical, but it becomes the rules of the game. And so similarly, to your point, Mark, there's that question. And even when you use Allura, which I'm first learned when I was talking to you, so I appreciate that. Let's take the example of that where I mentioned the Kuko film, animated film. So it's all his artwork. So I would imagine, even though it was AI generated, that's animated film is purely his and copyrighted his and entirely owned by him. But there's probably a legal, somebody can make an argument from a legal standpoint that may not be the case for at least certain elements of the film. So this is just something that's not just interesting from a conversational standpoint. It is a real thing for people who are investing resources in creating something that they believe they own.
Going back to Mark's point, does Sony try to say they own the content that's shot with their cameras as part of it? Don't think they do. Don't think they've even tried.
Nope.
I think
Maybe because they know they're a tool.
I didn't hear about that one, but yeah,
that's
that's outrageous.
Which is that is this model really just a camera? It captures the IP that's placed on top of it as when we're on a set and we're shooting. That belongs to the studio that's funding that, but it doesn't belong to Ariflex. It doesn't belong to the editing system.
So I think as long as the technologists keep insisting that it is a tool, which has been the current state, then we're not going to run into that being an issue. But hey, lawsuits are fun.
Right. I have to say that it seems like if you're going to develop IP, develop your characters outside of AI, draw them, whatever you got to do, trademark them, copyright them outside of AI, and then use these tools to do character studies, scenes, whatever, maybe eventually make a film, whatever. But going into it, you own that IP, that character, because you developed it outside of AI. Isn't that a workflow that at least starts to give some ownership to the creators?
Yeah, I think that's the Kuko example where I think that is very likely that person would still own it because it was all his artwork that he created outside of the generation.
And provable in a court of law.
Peter, are you familiar with, there was a case that was brought against Digital Domain after I sold the company, where this fellow in San Francisco who developed facial capture recognition capabilities sued Disney and said that the movies that because they didn't have a license to use it, because Digital Domain and the Chinese that own Digital Domain just said, oh, let's steal it and let's use it. And so there was this lawsuit where the fellow who developed this technology that allowed them to do this facial capture said the only way that Disney could have made this movie, I think it was Beauty and the Beast, I forget which one, could have been because of the use of this technology. And therefore he sued Disney and wanted a piece of the profits of the company for that film. And the decision was made that they threw the case out of court.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not familiar with that film, but that's more like what Andy was talking about. A camera, that film couldn't have been made without the camera that you use, but the camera maker does not own the film, which is very different though than self-generating content.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and the problem with your plan, Kurt, is that if you're gonna create your own characters without AI, you need to have a certain level of artistic skill to be able to go do it. And a lot of people will say, I need the AI tool to help me generate this world I want to create.
Hence, true creatives should know how to use these tools and do things the right way. And creative people win because they already had the gift, right?
Well, Peter started to say this earlier too. I think the route that all of this is going is being able to have a provable track record of what the human and the AI interacted on. And that becomes the basis of what you have the ability to trademark, copyright, place some sort of IP against. It's not the output necessarily, but it's that the human interaction with the AI that you have the ability to earmark as the original human origin of the content.
it's going to be fascinating how it all plays out. That's for sure.
I'm less worried about that. I mean, I'm worried about where the core models are trained on, but I at least for high-end professional content, I actually see we're going to have this hybrid style workflow anyway, right? I might, of my 2-hour movie, I may generate entire scenes, spaceship flying through space, kind of easy. Just generate that with a trained model that knows what my spaceship looks like and knows what space looks like. I can just type that in, have it generate that. I'm going to have scenes with human actors. I'm going to get a camera. I'm going to point it right at the people, and I'm going to shoot them against a real environment using a traditional workflow. And then I'm going to have something in the middle, which is, maybe I've got a real human and I've got a CG character and I've got a CG background, and I may throw that up on a wall, a virtual production wall. I'm going to use AI to generate the imagery in the background. I'm going to have a human here and a CG character who's being driven by AI right there. So in my 2-hour movie, I got a little bit of everything in there. And I think that's where we're going to end up, right? That's for a lot of content, it is going to reduce the cost. It's going to make them a lot faster to make. So we're going to be able to see more of that. And hopefully, when you reduce the risk, the cost, and therefore the risk, then you do allow more creativity to come out of traditional Hollywood. Because a lot of the reason why they keep making big blockbusters at $200 million is because they've worked and they've proven to work to keep doing it. If you can lower the cost, you could arguably increase the risk profile that people are willing to take, and you might get a lot more content. But you also get a lot faster as well, right? So if there's something topical now, you can have a movie about it in 3 months because people can go create that. But that does not mean that it's going to be a movie entirely created with AI. It's AI as part of a workflow of which there are humans doing human things and AI doing AI things to help them. And that's that new workflow that I'm talking about. That we have no idea how that works at scale, especially.
Well, here's just one little nicety on that, which is just a kind of a head scratcher. So without, again, getting too much in the weeds on the legality front, but I'll give you an example. So Mark, you were talking about there's going to be certain film, and I agree with you that there'll be different uses, but I can imagine a major motion picture where you have an aspect that's purely generated, let's say, right?
Yep.
It's just, and let's just assume it's the spaceship.
Yep.
And it's
establishing shots, classic thing.
Like stock footage or something like that,
Yep.
and was based on that. There's the one precedent that's already been to the Copyright Office was that there was a book of some kind that had generated art and then text that was original text. But then there was generated art. And the Copyright Office rejected the generated art aspect of the book. So the rest of the book was copyrightable, but the generated art was not. So it's fascinating how this is going to all play out.
Yeah, I just want to remind people of Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. Do you remember that movie? It was like the first,
really.
well, it was like the first bad movie that was all CG with actors in front of green screens, and revolutionary at the time, but very forgettable. But somehow, that whole process, Scott certainly knows, yeah, we can create complete worlds, with better filmmakers than Sky Captain did.
That one of the things that, to Peter's point, is that there will be a transition. And most of the filmmakers I've had the either fortune or misfortune of working with over my career as directors are not quick and decisive and capable of iterative processes. It takes them a while to be able to embrace it and understand it and come up with suggestions. And then that didn't work, and let's try it this way. And so, the traditional filmmakers, and I'll consider Jim Cameron one of those traditional filmmakers, and he's very technically oriented. I think he's not going to take that process and just say, let me see this, let me see this, let me see this. He needs to be involved in it, and he needs to make decisions about it. And it doesn't come quickly for him. It takes him a while to be able to feel those decisions and see the direction that it's going. And so I don't know how much more quickly it's going to take that AI will allow traditional filmmakers. They're going to have to go through this transitional process, similar to the folks that went through the process of visual effects and CGI, as opposed to sort of analog filmmakers that were using models and miniatures. It took them a while to be able to do that.
Yep. But I think the other interesting thing that's happening at this time is this transition is happening at the same time that game engines are kind of exploding on the scene as well. And from visual effects point of view, they're both GPUs, right? So I've been looking at CoreWeave, which is the share price is going through the roof. That's an AI cloud, is how they pitch it. But what it's effectively is a GPU cloud, right? That's where they focus. And they're obviously focused on AI, but you combine that with sort of Unreal Engine, and then you get this ability to say, I want to be able to generate a scene. I want to then, or some objects. I want to drop them into a 3D environment in a game engine. I want to be able to manipulate them in there. I want to be able to make decisions and change things, and then stick my virtual camera in and sort of walk through how I'm going to shoot this scene. You may not use it for final pixels, but that would normally be that sort of previs process at the beginning of a movie, a couple of months worth of research and development and stuff that you could slaughter down to a few weeks. And I think it's that incremental. If I can do, instead of waiting for renders overnight, I can do my renders in real time and I can get approval from the director right now and I walk out the door.
Yeah.
That's the sort of stuff that adds up over time that can take weeks out of a production where you're just waiting for renders and approvals. And can I get all of that out of the way and just speed things up? That's, but we don't know. What's the ROI of that against the investment you have to make to build the AI in the first place? Like, there is no clear business case here that says it's worth spending 10 million bucks right now to build the Marvel Laura for pick a video model, Moon Valley, and say that's the investment I'm willing to make, and I'm going to put 10 million bucks on the table right now. I'm not sure any studio can do that right now because I wouldn't know how to calculate the ROI, and I'd do that for a living.
Well, I think what's coming up as a theme is the collaborative effort around filmmaking, that it isn't just one person. It isn't certainly a studio executive sitting there prompting to make the next Keanu Reeves action movie in anime. That's what Lionsgate Vision is now at this point. So I think AI literacy, embracing these tools of everyone up and down the chain, those that can survive the layoffs with these visual effects companies, I think they need to embrace it and make themselves more valuable and train themselves, and develop their own IP and workflows around traditionally what they've always done. And so there are companies that are coming out. I just had a great conversation with Lisa, who owns Cinema, Sinima, and she's not only exploring AI films, but actually thinking of the whole process, the whole ecosystem, the whole marketplace, and having one-stop shop for that, but being able to integrate and aggregate other tools, but help visual effects artists, all those people in the collaborative element of filmmaking, give them a role, give them the power to monetize and create their own IP around this new technology so that other filmmakers can license their IP and tools, maybe not them as people, but there's a way for them to make money. And I think that out of the box thinking is crucial, to think holistically about not only workflow, but just distribution flow and IP creation and these tools. So know that those things are happening, and it'll be fascinating 10 years from now with the next generation of filmmakers. Hopefully, we're all still around to see this, and the people who would have grown up in this new world of technology and AI and have kind of mastered and created and solved a lot of these problems that we're facing right now that have been stumbling blocks.
Yeah, Kurt, one thing I hope we get into a little bit is on when we're talking about the tools and the capabilities and all of that, where we've spent a fair amount of time, that also just the beyond the power of the tools and the kind of impacts that we're talking about on creativity and art itself, but also the what they call ethical AI and some of that, because as creators, that's going to, for many creators out there, that may have an impact on which tools they choose to use. Ethical AI, meaning
Yes.
that based on licensed, consented sources of content. They're
Okay,
LLM.
okay, just on ethics. So Mark talked about the billions of dollars poured into these few companies. It seems like 10% of those billions of dollars could go towards licensing deals to do things the right way. It seems that way.
One
All it
would
takes
think.
is Yeah, earmark it, right? Or just have a percentage. It's like any investment or investors demand that 10% goes to licensing content. So they're not investing in technology that will be sued and the company will fail whenever the big lawsuits start to happen that take these companies down. So, it's also the investment companies, the VCs that are, and the technologies companies investing in OpenAI. Microsoft is investing in OpenAI. So at some point, these people have to set criteria to enable the licensing and earmark
Yep.
licensing as a
I have a,
demand.
I have a great anecdote on that.
Okay.
First of all, I wrote one article that was talking about $1 trillion is kind of the estimate that the big guys are going to be spending on AI in general, not just generative AI, but AI in general. And then the amount of reported licenses, the dollars so far, and a very aggressive estimate, not a conservative estimate, aggressive estimate, giving the tech companies the benefit of the doubt. It was something like 0.1% of that sum has been utilized for licensing content, to your point. Here's a perfect anecdote about that. I'm pretty deeply involved in the licensing of content representing media companies with AI developers for training purposes and display purposes too. And in one of my recent conversations, an unnamed executive said, well, this studio wanted $1 billion for licensing their content. And it was exasperated that that was the case. And meanwhile, my reaction to that is exactly your reaction, which is, okay, $1 billion, of course, that's a significant sum of money, but we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that are being invested. And it's pretty fascinating that when we're talking about the infrastructure, that's very understandable to the tech companies. Like that's something, it's a given. We have to buy the servers, et cetera. But when it comes to the content, there is this fundamental disconnect. And it comes through in just the language that is used by the tech companies in these conversations where it's about data, it's all data, right? For training purposes. And I always stop them and say, hey guys, this is content. These are the creative works of these people. And so one little hot take for you, a little tip I can give you is don't call it data in your licensing discussions.
Yeah, I agree. I've done a few of those. There's a company called Protege that's out there doing those sort of licensing things, and I've got involved in some of that. And it's intriguing that, the models that are out there right now have largely been trained on scraped content from the internet. And there's a finite quality in those, right? They are not Hollywood blockbusters with a 2-hour arc. They tend to be short and snappy and clip, and you're training a model to understand that. I was in a conversation with a large tech company who know what they're doing with AI, and they were trying to license some media and avoid European copyright issues with having faces of Europeans in any of the video. Please don't send us video with anyone with any humans in there. It could be European. Oh, what? Okay, that's tricky. So that immediately narrows down what you're going to give them. But I was talking about soccer, sports. A European football game. I can't give you a European football game because all the players have signed off on their waivers. But when you pan across the crowd, I can't guarantee that the crowd have all signed a waiver to be in a piece of TV footage, and therefore, by inference, therefore allowed to also be used for AI training. So they were saying, this is an honest quote from a tech company. Blur out their faces then. And I was like, wait, stop. Are you joking? You want me to give you video to train your model on where it thinks that crowds of people don't have faces anymore? And you think that's a good thing to train from, do you? And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's a good point. No, don't do that. Really? What the hell are you guys doing? They have no expertise in media licensing. They're largely a bunch of, computer scientists, PhDs, great. They really understand AI. And then they turn around and go, okay, so give me the content then. And you go, well, the content's got 100 years worth of value applied to it. We know exactly how much this stuff is worth when you're going to license it. And they come with 5-year license terms or 2-year license terms or a 1-year license term. And these AI companies are like, well, I can't do that. This model is going to live on for the next 10 years maybe, and then there'll be another one after that, and we might use this as a seed, and we want perpetual media rights. And you can, well, no one's ever had that. no studios license perpetual media rights to anyone ever. That's crazy. No one would do it. And the problem they have, which comes back to this, are we going to get into a new litigious phases of this, is it is too hard for these big tech companies to reverse engineer a model and extract a piece of IP. So if they're sued at some point in the future and someone says, that 5 minutes in there, you absolutely cannot have, and it's part of your big model, which had trillions of data points that went into it, and I'd like you to just pull out these little bits here, the model doesn't operate in the way that they thought it did. And that's their risk, which is why they should be spending the money on licensing it. Because, you better know now, if you're retraining and training from this core model, you better know that the core is 100% IP protected, because your ability to pull that out 5 years down the line is going to be really, really hard.
Isn't the solution to that to buy the studios?
That's entirely possible. I
But
mean, Amazon bought
And they're sitting
MGM.
on all the money in the world. So, I mean,
But here's a wrinkle on that, though, too, guys, is that, and I'm involved in a lot of these kinds of discussions too, is that talent agencies and others, representatives, they're going to go bananas and immediately jump on any kind of studio that licenses its library for AI purposes, because the underlying individual talent, they will make the claim that underlying individual talent has not given their consent.
Off on it. Yeah.
And so that is a very significant issue that's kind of floating around out there, but hasn't been addressed. It's kind of the quiet story that hasn't received enough attention, but it's definitely there, and that's holding studios back.
But look at contracts now versus a year ago.
Yeah,
have those clauses in there.
100%, 100%.
And so, like moving forward, IP moving forward.
But that's the same. The talent agreements are the same as those studio agreements. The talent and the agencies that represent them see an opportunity in AI as well. I want to create a Laura for me that I can be in 3 movies at the same time, or my kids can be getting paid while I'm making a movie 10 years after I died. So they've also got a vested interest to say, I want to generate, new IP off of the back of me.
Right.
So everyone's
it's all about control. They want to have control. Understandably, by the way.
Yeah.
Understandably, they want to have control.
Yep.
Andy, what are your thoughts? I see you chuckling there, because I know these ridiculous notions, but all these scenarios are possible.
I mean, mostly just laughing because I think it does come down to, I mean, Peter was calling this out. The control is absolutely the issue, and I think the problem, or some of the angst that's going on, is that it's shifted from the traditional businesses that have had it, which have been the studios, to these tech companies that own the technology that isn't a required part of the business in order to get this done. We are far from figuring it out. That goes without saying, really. But it's interesting to watch play out, and I think we're far from getting it done. I look forward to the day I see a digital Mark Turner doing a song.
Yeah, it's
my nearly
Mark in the movie.
As part
this
of
is a digital. Mark Turner is down the pipe.
It'll have
this
all
is
European,
Mark Turner's AI.
It'll have European faces and British accents.
Mark, I want to represent you and get, I'll do it for a straight 15%. Okay.
Hey, speaking of percentages,
we
do have a question that I want to read from one of our viewers. So Teresa Stone writes, how much will AI agencies or companies demand from its human collaborators? Perhaps demanding 10 or 15% of an author creator's original work? Some say that AI agents or companies already own percentages of a creator's work, just don't know it yet. So is that model out there, or even being discussed?
Well, I would imagine if the question is representation for what Mark or Andy, what you were saying of, let's say, Tom Cruise, and you have scanned him, and so you have the digital Tom Cruise, or whatever you want to call it, and you can now, Tom Cruise can be in a commercial while he's sipping margaritas on a beach.
Pretty sure that's already happened, but go ahead.
Right. I would imagine that it would be the typical agency model where they get their percentage just because it's a new opportunity, it's a new gig. It's just another thing that they were able to get for their talent. That's what I would imagine the case will be for traditional agencies and traditional talent that are in these kind of new worlds of generative AI.
Yeah. I think they're more interested. I think you're right. They probably get a percentage of that because most of what they get paid is to find the deal and broker the deal.
Yeah, exactly.
What becomes more interesting is if someone creates an entirely new action hero that is entirely fake, that doesn't exist. Now, what does WPP get paid if they make up a new sort of Tom Cruise and he starts appearing in movies and all this advertising and stuff as well, and it doesn't actually exist at all? I would assume that the owner of that model gets paid.
Of course.
That's the synthetic media. That's a whole nother.
But a synthetic character, right? So a synthetic character that's inserted into real media. Yeah, that's
Mark.
That's like She, right?
Here's a mind bender for you, though. Even in that case, all these Tom Cruises of the world where, their images, their biometrics are in the data set. So this new character, who's a handsome fellow, who's purely synthetic, doesn't even resemble Tom Cruise. Nonetheless, Tom Cruise's biometrics had some kind of minimal impact. Is there a claim just for utilizing somebody's biometrics without their consent? There are state laws against doing that.
How does one prove that?
It's a damn good question.
Yeah.
But
it's diffusion. These are diffusion models where, and this is the same thing that, I go back to Sarah Silverman's book, right? Yes, it was scraped, okay? But no one's replicating Sarah Silverman's book, on the other side of accessing data through AI and writing a book. So yes, Tom Cruise's DNA is somehow in these diffusion models, but it's blown to 1 billion bits, right? And then somehow reconjured through another 1 billion bits, and said character is out there, and it's like, how do you trace it through all those billions of bits?
But I have a problem, and I think it's very logical, and I think it's very human, and I think it's right for me as a human being to be giving consent for my biometrics, my images to be part of a training data set that creates value, even though
that's on the front end. That's on the front end. But if something's happened and it's gone through this diffusion model, how do you prove it? That was the question. It's like, I don't see how you connect it, how you can prove it.
If Bill Baglar is still listening, then he's working on exactly that. So we'll leave him to come up with a solution.
There are some AI forensic types out there who can, if you ask them to see, okay, is this person part of a training data set? They're in that data set. They can, with near certainty, determine whether they are or not, not.
In a particular inference, yeah.
Yes.
So they can say this training set was using this inference. Yeah. But I'm going to defend the AI companies a little bit, which is we can't be honestly say that all Hollywood content is original, right? A lot of stuff is derivative.
Of course.
And, we've taken that idea before. We've had characters that happen to get cast because they look like that person, but they can get the real actor or blah, 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 blah. So there is a limit to how far you can push that before you go. A fraction of my idea, but wrapped in a bunch of other ideas, becomes something original in itself. And this is the stuff the Copyright Office is struggling with right now, even as simple as, an image. Yeah. How many times do you have to manipulate it with AIs before it becomes human creativity? And do they catch up fast enough for this market? Will they ever catch up? Is a better question, probably.
Early on, Scott Phillips, I don't know if you know him, he I'm going to say in the early 90s, maybe late 80s, was scanning actors' faces. And for example, he scanned in Marlon Brando and put a deal together with Marlon Brando that he had the ability in perpetuity to be able to use Marlon Brando's images, digital images, in anything that he wanted to use it in. So the question becomes, can now actors sort of circumvent their agents and sign their rights over to these companies and not have to pay commission to agents?
Yeah, and again, it comes down to the contract they signed with their agent when they signed 5 years ago.
That's happening in the music industry. Vocal Roots AI is a company that is working with the estates of dead rappers
Yeah,
and their surviving families and resurrecting their voices and creating new music. And that family, that estate, is getting paid, and this voice is creating revenue with new songs, not from a library, but new songs, and it's directly benefiting the estate. I don't think any agents in that deal flow. Frank Nitty's, a rap producer who has created this technology and wanted to do it the right way, ethical AI, work with the estates, get the permission, create the music.
that's
So
the key. It's control. It's consent and control. That's what it comes down to.
right. And so, I mean, those are a lot of the union issues around, are actors going to give up their image into a system, based on a contract they signed and they didn't read the fine type.
Right.
They're losing control if they're not completely reading that, or the studio contracts are forbidden from doing that based on union rules. So again, how do they? There is a path. There is a way to do it, and some actors will say, "Yeah, if I can make six movies from the one and I'm paid appropriately for all six movies, you're not abusing that access to my image, then yeah, that should be monetized and everyone should be paid. And that's a business model. So it's happening in music, it could happen in film.
So I will say, well, I was just reading some of the comments that Rosemary made a comment about lawyers. I will say one thing, right? Someone said a while ago, it was probably 12 months ago now, that the one people that are going to make a fortune out of AI are lawyers, which you listen to this conversation, I would agree, until they're not, because ultimately a lot of what they do and write contracts and stuff, that's going away
Oh,
because AI can do that
100%.
stuff today.
Right.
So,
100%.
I have this theory that the top 5% of every industry is protected from AI. The bottom 95% are the ones that need to worry, right? So no one's going to make a movie with digital Tom Cruise when you can have real Tom Cruise. Voiceover artists, there is a voiceover artist in France that's been doing Arnold Schwarzenegger for the last 30 years. And people in France, when they see an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, they
That's how
expect
he
this
sounds.
guy's voice because he is, in their mind, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's been dubbing it for so long, right? So I can make a movie right now, but real Arnie's voice speaking French, but those people go, wait, who the hell's that? That doesn't
That's
sound
not
like what I was
Arnold.
thinking. So that 5% of voiceover artists, they're going to be all right. But the other 95%, if they haven't lost their job already, their job is gone within the next 12 months because we mentioned this earlier, but Respeecher and some of the other tools that are out there, you can absolutely draw a line at which point every TV show and every movie will be available in every language using the artist's original voice with accurate lip sync.
Speaking into
Right? You want to watch Avengers 14 in Swahili? By 2030, I genuinely believe every Netflix show will be available in every language in the world in the original voice talent. And it will cost them so little
and
to
the
do
lip
it, they might
syncing
as well.
work.
And the lip sync will be perfect
Yes. And
because
that's
that
amazing.
stuff
That is
is
amazing.
amazing. And it is, as we said earlier, democratizing and takes away a lot of the cultural barriers and you can have a show wash over you that's in French. You don't have to try and read it or anything. Like it genuinely changes things and makes, by the way, flip that. It makes a whole bunch of international content attractive to the American market because on the whole, Americans don't like reading subtitles and they don't like dubbed movies, just period. But all this amazing international content will come flooding into America as well. So we're going to have amazing amounts of content. It's going to be great. Apart from the fact that, well, I was going to say we've got jobs to do and there's only 24 hours in a day, but maybe we won't have jobs to do. So it won't matter. We'll just sit around watching new international movies all the time.
UBI.
We all lost our jobs.
Until Trump puts the tariffs on.
UBI, guys. UBI.
UBI.
Hey, gentlemen, so let's just go around the horn with some closing statements because we're getting to the end. We actually filled the hour and a half, which is pretty awesome because it didn't feel that long. So let's start with Andy on some closing statements and thoughts.
Well, it's been a fun discussion to listen to without question. Clearly, we haven't solved anything, but I think we are having all the right conversations here that we need to do. And I think the thing I would leave with anybody is that more than ever, critical thinking will be very important as we look at this. Criticize what's going into a model, criticize what's coming out of it, ask it for receipts, ask it for how it made that, and continue to think for yourself. And the thinking you do for yourself in that is aided by AI, you will find that it is useful, it is faster, it allows you to ultimately do more at the end, whether it's making movies, making TV shows, making music, or doing your taxes.
Yeah, I haven't even got into that. So, Mark, final thoughts?
Yeah, no, look, it's all exciting. It's gonna be different. Of that we can be sure, right? Everything that we thought we knew in the last 100 years is going to change in the next five. So that's interesting. Good time to be here. But I'll just remind people it comes down to models, extensions of models, tools, and this is roughly in order. Artists, creators of that, and then the pipeline, right? And it's actually all five of those things. You can't just say we got a model and therefore we're going to make great content. You need all five of those things to actually make any sort of content at scale. And everybody's obsessing about this sort of core model idea, but actually they're missing the other four sections of that thing, which is what makes it scale. And that's possibly the tripping up point that big tech companies have got, is they don't think those other four things are important. You can just prompt the hell out of the thing and it'll just make great movies, and it won't, because you need the rest of those layers. So I'm waiting for some of that stuff to come along before we really see the great content.
Cool. Yeah. So, Peter.
Yeah, look, I think that everything flows from the human experience, and so AI is a tool. I understand AI is a panacea that will create the next great thing. I don't see that happening. But even if you're an auteur, so for filmmakers out there, even if you're an auteur, you see Darren Aronofsky, who's one of the great auteurs today, who entered into a deal to I forgot who it was with. Was it with Google?
Yeah.
But Aronofsky, if he does that, I think that's a good indicator to everybody out there that the most important thing is to understand the language of what we're talking about. Because again, this gets back to being stoic. It is what it is. You will be in a better position to understand what's going on and achieve success for what you want to do if you know how to use the tools, if you know the language of them, and then you can choose whether or not to implement them or to what extent. And on the one extreme, you have people like Christopher Nolan, who's a great director, auteur, who certainly knows how to understands how to use technology, yet he chooses to go the other way in his filmmaking. That's part of his brand, and audiences reward him for that. So it's just a broader palette.
Okay, cool. And Scott, last thoughts.
First of all, Chris Nolan uses a ton of visual effects, even though he says he doesn't. And it's part of his marketing. You know, this reminds me of several years ago, I was in China.
You got me.
Yeah, several years ago, I was in China doing some work, and Ready Player One had just come out. And all these Chinese postgraduate students were all excited about virtual reality. And I asked them, you know, so like, where's the content going to come from? And what's this going to all be about? And, you know, aren't we concerned that we're just going to be like the super fat people on the deck of you know,
Wally.
of Wally? And he said, well, yeah, that's not a worry that I have. And I said, why is that? He said, because when manufacturing changes and all of these different things happen and it affects the Chinese society, we'll be able to have a good life. And I said, well, how does that work? And he said, well, the government's going to pay for everything. So I'm concerned about the workers, and the workers in my industry in particular, the 100,000 people that are now semi-gainfully employed in visual effects and animation, and what will they do? And what are the opportunities for them? And I think we need to start talking about what those opportunities are, and efforts need to be put in place to be able to come up with ways to train these people, because it's going to really be an ugly mess, and the rich will continue to get richer and the poor will continue to get poorer, and it's not a good scene.
Yes, you brought up before that James Cameron's not going to take a cut, and the studios aren't going to take cuts, but the people who are cut are the workers. So much for democratization, right? When those rights and those jobs are eliminated. So I believe that people need to get trained. They need to get literate in AI and also not only understand the language of creativity, but the language of business, because there's business models involved, and the
Yeah.
language of legal and ethics. And all those things are equally important. So I think people need to not just focus on these tools, but they also have to understand the context and the collaborative nature, certainly in filmmaking, as it approaches AI filmmaking, which will just be filmmaking. Again, that first film that comes out will be judged as a film. So people got to get ready. They need to not put all their eggs in one basket with one person driving that engine, but work with a team, and that collaborative effort has always led to great success. And so that spirit in Hollywood, I hope, continues through this technology change. But it is a fascinating time. I think it should be, creative centered, and real filmmakers getting into it, I think is an important step. So let's hope that that continues. But thank you, all of you, for joining me tonight on this webinar. And I'll let you know when it goes up online. And thanks everyone who I can't see who have listened to us and asked, some poignant questions. Thanks for participating. So thanks everybody. Have a good night. Thanks for doing this during the dinner hour, at least on the West Coast. So hope everyone has a successful week, and we'll do this again. I'm already getting requests to do this part 2. So we'll see what we can do, and maybe bring some other voices and maybe some women, right? It's not that I didn't ask women to participate. They said no. So we got all guys first round. So we'll see how we can do better in round 2.
All right, cool.
Great to see you,
Kurt.
Kurt.
Take care, Kurt.
All you guys, great to see you.
Yeah, good to see all of you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Realm IQ. Transform your business with AI-driven innovation.
Subscribe to our Media Slam newsletter and learn more about the intersection of design, content, and technology.
KurtDoty.co. Branding, marketing, and product development.